Welcome to this tutorial for working with grids. In this tutorial, you will learn about the grids in Tekla structures, how to import reference files, and how to modify grid properties and create views along grid lines. When you create a new model, Tekla structures automatically creates a rectangular grid and a view according to the saved standard properties. A grid represents a three-dimensional complex of horizontal and vertical planes. The grid is shown on the view plane using dash and dot lines. You can create both rectangular and radial grids. Use grids as an aid in locating objects in a model. You can find the grid tools on the ribbon under the Edit tab. To create a grid, pick the origin points for X, Y, and Z, and define the grid coordinates on the side pane properties. You can make rectangular grids, and grid lines act magnetically, so that the objects on the grid lines of a rectangular grid follow when you move the grid line. To do this, set magnetic grid plane to yes. When you have set the properties, you can place the grid in the model. In this course, we work on just one grid, but you can have more than one grid in a model. You can, for example, create a large-scale grid for the entire structure, and smaller grids for some detailed sections. You can import PDF files as reference files. This is done from the File menu. On the File menu, click Import and Insert PDF Document. The Insert PDF Reference Model dialog box opens. Click Browse. Browse for the PDF and click Open. Set the scale for the reference model and the page you want to import. Click OK and pick a point to place the reference model. If the model isn't positioned aligned with the grid, you can reposition it easily with the Move command. Select the reference drawing, right-click, and select Move. Pick the point you want to align with the origin, and then the grid origin from your model. To import a drawing as a reference, on the side pane, go to Reference Models. Click Add Model. In the dialog that opens, click Browse and find the DWG file from your computer. You can define an offset, adjust the scale, or rotate the reference model. Then click Add Model. The drawing is added to the list. You can open the properties for the reference drawing by double-clicking it. From the properties, you can, for example, adjust which layers are visible. You can align the drawing with the grid origin using the Move command. Click Expand to expand the work area. Pause here to practice what you just learned. Let's modify the grid so that we can start building our model. First, check that the Grid Selection button is selected. Select the grid. You can move the grid lines by dragging them. Using the drawing as reference, move the lines to their correct positions. Let's remove grid line D. When the grid was modified, the work area of the view, shown with the dashed line cube, was not updated. Let's fit the work area to the modified grid. Click in the view to activate it. The border will turn yellow when the view is active. Next, right-click and select Fit Work Area to Entire Model. It is possible to turn off the Rollover Highlight option that is on by default. Simply press the H key on your keyboard when you have the view selected. You can hide the work area cube. Select the view, hold down the Control and Shift keys, right-click, and then select Redraw View. Under Grid Line Properties, you can define how far the grid lines extend in the directions left, below, and right, above. You can hide the reference model from the side pane. Grid properties are not updated when you make manual changes to the grid. Let's fix this by defining the grid line coordinates in the properties. To open the properties, select the grid. This opens properties in the side pane. First, in origin, define the grid origin. The values offset the grid from the work plane origin. Then define the coordinates for the grid by entering values for x, y, and z directions. Set the labels according to the coordinates. The x and y coordinates of the grid are relative. This means that entries for x and y are always related to the previous entry. The z coordinates are absolute, which means that the entries for z are always absolute distances from the work plane origin. The labels are the names of the grid lines shown in views and will be displayed on the drawings. The line extension properties lets you define how far the grid lines extend in different directions. You can also change the color of the grid, as well as the color and font size of the grid labels. You can lock the grid to avoid making changes to it accidentally from the user-defined attributes. When something has been modified, the field turns yellow. To save the modifications, click Modify at the bottom of the side pane. Pause here to practice what you just learned. Let's create elevation and plan views along the grid lines created before. A view is a representation of a model from a specific location. First, select a grid line to highlight the grid. Right-click and select Create View along grid lines. You can create views along grid lines for both rectangular and radial grids. In the dialog that opens, click Create. Views are created automatically. Note that if the grid properties were incorrect in some way, the views you create using this method can be incorrectly named or cut at the wrong elevations. The Views dialog box appears with a list of all views. All unopened, named views are listed on the left, and all open views on the right. Move the views from hidden to visible and vice versa with the arrow keys. You can have up to 9 views open at once. Click OK to close the dialog box. Each view is displayed in its own window inside the main Tekla Structures window. Each view has a view plane on which the grids are visible. Selecting a part in a view highlights the part in all open views. To switch between views, press Ctrl+Tab on your keyboard. You can switch a view between the 3D view and plane view with the keyboard command Ctrl+P. Pause here to practice what you just learned. You have now reached the end of this tutorial. In this tutorial, you learned how to modify grids in Tekla Structures and how to create views along the grid lines.